I'm David Gewirtz for ZDNet, and today we're going to answer the question, has Apple abandoned professional Mac users? Welcome back. I am pleased to have an all-star team with us today from all across the world. I'm coming to you from Central Oregon. Moving east across the map will take you to Jason Perlow. Hey, Jason, how are you?
What's up, David?
You're in Florida, aren't you?
I am indeed, and it's now thundering. We've had torrential rain the last couple of weeks. We're now in the monsoon season.
We just read an article about Florida falling into the ocean again, but
it's not going to be my problem when it happens.
No, it's not going to be your fault either. So we're good.
No.
So, Jason, I asked for a short intro line, and yours was "Make Macintosh Great Again," because why not, right?
Right.
There you go. All right.
It's an American product. It originated built and designed in California. It should be made great again.
Yeah.
To show the American supremacy over the world.
Absolutely.
We need to do this as Americans.
Yeah. As we now move to the two non-Americans in our show. So, moving across the pond, Adrian, you are in Wales, are you not?
I am, yes. I'm currently enjoying the 3 or 4 days of summer that we actually get, so trying to make the most of it.
Do you have any technology you've designed in Wales?
Oh, come on.
Besides
I don't think so.
Television shows occasionally?
Yeah, I think all that's borrowed as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it ended with us with the dragons, and that was it.
Right.
Adrian is a technology watcher, maker, and breaker of all things new and shiny. And then you're going to have to help me out here, Oliver. Are we going west, or are we going east, or are we going north and east?
Keep going east. Keep going
east. So this
east and south from Wales. So.
East and south. Okay, so Oliver Breidenbach, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, it's good enough.
Why don't you help us get it right?
But that's I don't expect anyone to.
Breidenbach, right?
Breidenbach.
Oh, Breidenbach. Yeah.
Breidenbach. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. You rose to the challenge.
There you go. So Oliver is in Salzburg, Austria, which I keep thinking of Sound of Music, Austria, but it's Salzburg.
That's exactly the city. Salzburg is exactly where Sound of Music was taking place, and we got the tons of American tourists here, traveling to the spots where Sound of Music was filmed.
That is awesome. So Oliver is CEO of Blanks Software. He is co-founder and CEO. He is in love with Apple products since he played on the first Apple computer back in 1977. Blanks Software reflects his passion for creative tools that make the most of technology and are easy and fun to use at the same time. And Oliver has some astonishing pieces of software. I'm going to give you 5 minutes or so, 2 or 3 minutes to give us a quick introduction about your software. And one of the reasons I'm so glad to have you here is that your Mac software requires powerful computers. And so this becomes really interesting because the kinds of stuff you produce requires more than just the sort of mid-range or off-the-shelf machines. And you really can't run, for example, Mimo Live on an iPad, can you?
Well, not yet on an iPad, but actually it depends very much on what you want to do. So Mimo Live is a live video switching, live video production system, allows you to take multiple video inputs and create, edit them in real time in live, edit them live, and then stream them out or record them to disk, and basically saves you all the troubles and time you need to spend usually in post-production. So it's depending on what you want to do with it. If you want to do green screening, if you want to do virtual studio stuff, if you want to switch like 10 cameras and what have you, we have something like Skype, where you can have people call in to Mimo Live into your studio and that takes takes off the performance of the CPU and the GPU, and so you can't, depending on what you want to do, you can use a Mac Mini with an i7, but sometimes it's not enough to have the big iMac Pro, and we even use that to the last bit of power it has. So Mimolife is one of those products where we can easily make full use of the power of any computer that you can throw our way. And so, of course, having high-end Mac systems is something that we very much need for Mimolife to be moving into certain areas of use cases, So, and the other products, Photomagico is a slideshow app for photographers, and if you want to do projections with 8K projectors, and then you also need quite powerful machine to render all the slideshow in real time, which is the strength of Photomagico. So it's sort of like a PowerPoint for photographers with, the main focus on image quality. So if you have an 8K projector, you want to be able to use every pixel of that, and that requires a machine with a certain oomph. So having high-end Pro Mac systems is certainly something that helps us a lot in the high-end use cases of our products. We can, the current lineup is sort of, for a lot of use cases, the current lineup is good enough, but we certainly want to move into, even crazier stuff, and then need more power.
So even if something like an iPad or an iPad Pro had really excellent processor power, you're still looking at needing lots of ports and lots of inputs, right? So you're still needing the ability to have lots of stuff going on. Your predecessor product was Blinks TV, and I ran that on my Mac Mini until my Mac Mini ran out of horsepower. I had like all the ports used, plus HDMI inputs, plus multiple network sources coming in, and at some point everything just sort of reached capacity, and I wasn't able to. I think it was an OS upgrade just killed the ability for that machine to do that, and I refused to buy a trash can Mac Pro. So it's just a matter of principle, and as a result, I'm doing this the hard way. But that's what we're discussing today.
So interestingly enough, if you want to jump in right now into the discussion, is that the Mac Pro, the trash can thing, is actually, if you compare it to a MacBook Pro, has several disadvantages. One of them is that it doesn't have an H.264 hardware compressor. So all the video compression for live streaming has to be done by the CPU, and that maxes out.
Did not know that.
Very, very, very easily. So if you want to live stream from your Mac, it's low-end iMac is better than the high-end MacBook Pro, the high-end Mac Pro. So that's kind of the ridiculous situation we have right now with the Mac lineup. Is that it's better to buy a consumer-grade iMac than a Mac Pro, and that gives you more horsepower and more bang for the buck.
That's crazy. So let's do a round robin. First thing I want to do is just say, when we were all kids, this kind of discussion would have been impossible. I mean, we're hitting two coasts of the United States and two countries in Europe simultaneously. I'm running this on a 2013 iMac. And in fact, I'm running this on a 2013 iMac. I have an iPad giving me teleprompter so I can actually see you guys and look at you in the face, as opposed to constantly turning this way. And I have my show notes on 2015 MacBook Pro, which is unfortunately a little underpowered because I put an i5 in it instead of an i7 because I don't know what I was thinking. So let's go around. Jason, I'm betting you're not running a Mac right now, right?
No. Not as my main production work desktop. Absolutely not. You know, it's interesting. I started flirting with Macs back in 2011. I was a diehard Mac hater for most of my life. In fact, I've written, you know, columns on ZDNet, and back when I originally started, probably in 2008, 2009, on why I didn't become a Mac user, why I hated Mac users, not so much why I hated Macs, but why I hated that entire culture, so to speak. And then what happened over time was, you know, as the smartphone stuff started sort of getting really big, you know, I became an iPhone user as I think it was the iPhone 5 is what really sold me on the iOS platform. And then of course the iPad came out in 2010. I bought the very first one that came out. I bought a new iPad every single year. I bought a new iPhone every single year. So I got locked into Mac system, Apple system, more from the iOS side than from the Mac side. And then around 2011, 2012 or so, I saw that the Mini came out. And I'm like, you know, maybe people are writing about this stuff. You know, there's some interesting apps. It's an interesting experience. Why don't I pick one or two of these up? And they were great little machines. I loved it. I bought myself, it was an i5 one. And I bumped up the memory and I put in SSD drives. And then I bought a second one and I used it for my television entertainment sort of center as well. And over time, I saw that, you know, Apple was just not giving the Mini its attention that it should have had for people that are in the prosumer or entry level professional market, that wanted to be able to attach their own monitors and wanted to be able to tweak things and so on and so on. I was never really in the market for some of the more higher end Mac products, but I was exposed to users in the professional space because in the consulting side, I work with a lot of various different CGI production shops, people doing high-end paint and stuff. My brother, of course, Brandon, runs a comic book company and did a lot of production, different 3D modeling things on Mac and also on PCs and Linux. And you know, there were some very good high-end applications for doing paint and modeling and type of, you know, that kind of thing, which I think that for a very long time, especially in the DP side and on the print production side, Mac absolutely ruled the space. But I think what happened is Microsoft caught up. I think Microsoft finally got things right with Windows 10. And you started to see, especially towards the tail end of Windows 7's time period on this earth, you started to see a lot more of a migration from people in Mac doing professional level things, especially on the Adobe side, towards using Windows 10. And that, I think, really hurt Apple's professional market in that one particular space. Now, there are other spaces such as audio production, other things that Mac is still pretty strong in, but I think that such a huge dent was put in their market. And I think because of that huge uptake in iOS, right? Apple is now, I believe, Mac is really only about 10 or 12% of Apple's revenues compared to all the other things that they do.
Yeah, they're still a $25 billion company.
It's still $25 billion.
The Mac could be a $25 billion company. If they were to spin it off, yes, it would be a $25 billion company on its own. But it's got $250 billion in revenues from everything else. Yep.
So it's kind of like, well, what do you assign your priorities to? And I think that's kind of like where Apple is now. Is do we continue to maintain this creature, right? By having small incremental updates to Mac OS. You know, giving it some lip service because it has to be a developer platform for iOS for the time being, right? I mean, there really is no technical reason why Mac OS has to be the developer platform for iOS. There are other things you could do, but we know, for example, that a lot of the libraries and things like that were at one point actually ported to Windows from Next. Mm-hmm. So we know that a lot of these object-oriented technologies can run on Windows if Apple wanted them to be, right? They could get Microsoft's help and they could do it. But there's a reason why at this point that iOS development has stayed on Macintosh.
Yeah, and we're going to look at that sort of question because that's a big part of why I'm glad Oliver's here, is to look at the question of doing that kind of development. Adrian, what are you rocking?
Actually, this is on a MacBook Pro that I'm kind of sitting in front of here, but my most powerful system would be a AMD Ryzen system I've got on the desk there. I kind of got into Macs pretty much the same way Jason did. I think I was sucked in mostly from the iPod side, and then I kind of switched to an iPhone 3GS. And I think that was the gateway into it. I got the iPad, and I also kind of felt like I needed to diversify what I was doing. I wasn't very happy with Windows at that point, either the hardware or the software in that respect. I had some bad experiences with notebooks. I'm not very kind on notebooks, and I had some bad experiences. And when I shifted to Mac, I was quite surprised as to how robust the hardware actually was.
Yeah, build quality was amazing about the time that
build, especially compared to the stuff I was buying, like HP and Dell. I mean, that was just at the time terrible, and Mac quality was just amazing at the time. There were some niggles with it. I mean, especially when it came to cooling. But when they moved on to the Retina MacBook Pros, they seemed pretty solid.
Yeah, it's interesting because the iMac that I use as my primary desktop iMac is now 5 years old, and I used to switch. I used to go through PCs, computers, every 15 to 18 months for my main desktop. Yeah. I needed to upgrade. This one is getting long in the tooth now, but it's running. I started back at Apple. I had the odd title of Godfather at Apple back in the HyperCard days. And it was we're all Mac and we're producing HyperCard and all that. Then I switched to all Windows and refused to ever touch Macs ever again for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And then I started to need to integrate some Mac software into my Windows workflow for these ginormous PowerPoints I do. And the only software that did what I needed was on the Mac. And so I was able to run Windows software on the Mac, but not Mac software on the Windows. So that's kind of where I got into this role. And Oliver, your products are Apple only. Is that a strategic choice? Is that a preference choice? Why is Mimo Live not a Windows product? I would think it would be ideal for Windows customers.
So I think we are experts on the Apple platform, and I think we get the most out of it, and we know our way around it, and so to get to the same kind of expert level on another platform is a lot of investment, and so since we've always been a Mac Mac only shop. It's worked for us quite well since we started. So it's a preference and also a strategic thing. I think it's not worth the investment on Windows to bring Mimo Live to Windows, that's kind of the gist of it.
So why are we having this conversation? Can't we just get all our work done on iPads and MacBook Pros? That seems to be where Apple is putting its attention.
Well, I think that's what Apple wants us to do, isn't it? Ultimately, I think
that this is sort of a more meta discussion in terms of when we look at end users, right? You got your consumers, and you got enterprise, and then you got something kind of sort of in between, right? The content creator types, the one-man shops, and then you got the 20-man shops and so on. But it all has to do with workflow, right? So as an IT professional, right, someone who works in the data center space and the consulting space, I need to have my big desktop computer, whether it's a Mac or a PC, doesn't matter, but I need to do my 2 big monitors. I need a powerful graphics card. I need to be able to handle high-speed network bandwidth. I need to be able to have video conferencing. There's a lot of functions that I need as a professional IT user. And I would imagine that people who have content creation workflows where they need to be able to do, work with very large data files and things like that, they need to have very similar capabilities. But the reality is that in the consumer space, where Mac was very big for a very long time, people can now get by with smartphones and tablets, and I would call them digital convergence content consumption devices, things like your Apple TVs, your Rokus, smart TVs, things like that. And I am increasingly, I think that, as those of us who write about the industry like us, I think we tend to get sucked into our own little edge case bubbles because we're like, well, I need to spend X number of $1,000s a year on computer equipment. I'm always buying the latest and greatest thing. But most of the people out there, they have their cell phones, their smartphones, they got their Wi-Fi at home. They've got a lot of them, they have a tablet, but a lot of them don't have personal computers anymore. And that encompasses both Mac and Windows. I think on the enterprise side, And they can get by. I mean, what are they doing? They're going on Facebook, they're checking emails, they're playing their 2D games for the most part, even their 3D games. So if they're more powerful 3D games, they're using Xboxes and PS4s and things like that. Yes, there's this huge $30 billion a year, desktop PC gamer industry, but I don't give a freaking care about those people. I'm an enterprise guy. So like that stuff doesn't exist. And even if you think about it, that $30 billion is spread across the entire planet. And most of them are probably Chinese and Koreans anyway, right? So if you think about it, the landscape in 2018 is completely different than it was 10 years ago in terms of where the users live. Now you have this huge IT, traditional IT crowd that uses Windows and internally built applications and like the Oracles of the world and the Microsoft 365s and all that stuff. Yeah, that exists and it's fine. It's going to be here for a while. But we look at the consumer space, and then the high end of that consumer space, which sort of bleeds into one-man app developer shops / content creator, web cartoonist, YouTuber, whatever you want to call that, right? That needs these more powerful digital processing capabilities for video and graphics. It's not where it's just these people are doing very, very interesting things with mobile devices now. If you look at what Instagram just came out with, was this the whole Instagram TV thing where people are going to just be walking around with their selfies and doing all sorts of crazy videos and getting millions of subscribers. Yeah, that's the future of content development for for some people. Yeah, now you got your professional people, using professional tools and outsourcing those to pro services, but that's going to be a niche business going forward.
Oliver, you kind of single-handedly changed the stop motion business, didn't you? With iPads.
Yeah, the iStop motion. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting experience. Yes. Well, I have to disagree a little bit because I think it matters. The platform and how it works matters for the quality of content you can create. And I think as more people get onto things like the Instagram TV thing and Facebook Live and YouTube Live, if you want to stand out, you need to upgrade your production quality. And I see a big push, for people who want to stand out from the crowds, and the simple I take my iPhone selfie camera and start broadcasting, and I think for for the if you look at if you look at producing content for the Apple platform, for example, for the iPhone or iPad, there are the advantages of using a Mac to do that, because of the similarity. For example, if you're programming apps, if you're coming from the Windows environment, you're not gonna understand the platform specific mechanisms and UI concepts as easily as you do if you come from the Mac. And so the quality of, apps are kind of a content as well. So if the quality of those apps is different from people who come from other platforms than the ones who come from the Mac platform, and it may not ultimately matter much for the user, but apparently it still matters for Apple. And so the idea to have the development platform on the Mac does make sense, and Xcode is an environment that I don't think can be easily transported over to Windows. And so I don't see that we're gonna see a push from Apple to abandon the Mac as a development platform. I think ultimately they want to go and have people develop apps on the iPad directly. But if you look at the iPad platform, it's not really. I've tried to switch to iPads for doing my business work for every time Apple releases a new iOS, I try again, basically. And I always run into this problem that on the iOS platform, contrary to the philosophy of the apps, where you have like a small app doing, one specific thing very good. It's like if you want to build a table or something, then you have to have this massive app that does everything from being a hammer to a saw to a drill to a whatever. Because the sandboxing or the borders between the apps that Apple introduced for security reasons prevent you from moving data around easily, and that's the big difference from the Mac or Windows to an iPad, is that the ease of integrating various tools into a workflow, and I think it's going to be getting better on the iPad or other platforms, other tablet platforms for sure moving forward. But right now, I think the need for a real Mac computer or a real Windows computer is because of this restriction and the iPad or iOS in general not being a very good platform for creating content.
So a lot of us, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of us as customers or as users or as professionals, I mean, like I said, my choice of using these devices is because I really can't do it as quickly on anything else. These Macintoshes are substantially more expensive. Many of them haven't been upgraded in years. Is this really just fanboy loyalty, or is it all about workflow? Adrian, you want to take a shot at that?
I think it is about workflow. At the end of the day, I think you use what you like to use, and I think if Mac fits into your workflow, it's a Mac. If it's Windows, it's Windows. And I think I'm hearing a lot lately about Apple abandoning Windows, Apple abandoning the Mac, and Apple kind of moving on to iOS. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think what I'm seeing at Apple more than anything is that there's an acknowledgement that no matter how good the Mac, they make a new Mac, or no matter what they add to the Mac, they can't really shift the needle on the amount of units they're pushing every quarter. It seems to hover at around that 4.5 to 5.5 million units a quarter. They know that. I think they've tried everything. I think they know that it's about at the capacity that they're willing to shift. I don't see them being able to shift to double that. I don't think that the Mac is some kind of Trojan iPhone that's waiting to kind of explode into 20 million units a quarter or something. I think they know what the sales are, what people are, how people are upgrading.
So you don't think the behind the Mac ads will move the needle?
No, I don't think so. I think what I'm seeing with Apple now is that they're trying to rewrite the narrative. And they started with the iPad when it was, well, the iPad's the replacement laptop. When you're thinking, well, what about the MacBook? And now we're seeing this kind of with the behind the Mac ad campaign. I don't know if anybody really paid attention to that, but there was some really old Macs there in some of those videos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's this kind of subtle hint that if you have a 5-year-old Mac, it doesn't really matter because it's still valid. You can still do real work on it. And it's not like a PC where you have that kind of 18-month upgrade cycle. In part, I think they're right. But I think on the edge cases, I think that's where the problem is going to be. That there's always going to be people who demand better hardware. And I think there's always going to be that kind of edge between people who want latest hardware and aren't interested in buying a Mac that's maybe 2 years old, hasn't been updated, hasn't seen a significant update in a few years, even though they can still do work on it. And I think Apple is slowly kind of trying to rewrite that narrative now that you don't actually need a brand new Mac every year or every 2 years. You can still do work on an old one.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I don't know.
The iMac Pro is in some ways ideal for what I need to do my job, but it has a screen I don't want to use. I want one of the Samsung Super Ultra Wides, and I don't want to have to lug around this 30-pound additional screen. If all they did was produce the iMac Pro inside a box without a screen, which I guess you might call a Mac Mini or a Mac Mini Pro, then I would have been all over it, even at that sort of extreme price. because I priced the iMac Pro against a very equivalently equipped PC, and they're using some premium gear, but is the iMac Pro all we really need for pro users? I mean, Oliver, this must have been something that was really interesting for you.
So we do have an iMac Pro here, and it's a fantastic machine, and it's really, really, very powerful, and we can do a lot of cool stuff with it. But it's going to be, out of date in 6 months, and there's no way to upgrade it, and it costs a whole lot of money. And I think Apple announced a new Mac Pro about a year ago. And they just they said, we're gonna do a new Mac Pro, and it hasn't materialized. And it's kind of interesting. Maybe in October when they ship the new Mac OS, maybe they just pull out a whole new range of Macs out of their basket. You never know with them. Or they might have taken lessons from your new president, and it's gonna be great. It's just trust me, believe me, it's gonna be.
I do
really
think
great.
we have
and
seen.
Then never anything happens. So I don't know. Maybe we should maybe come together in November and talk about.
I think we've seen some interesting signs and portents, though, especially during the last WWDC, which is this whole concept of eGPUs and externally connected modules. So I think that it's very possible we may be seeing a future of modular systems where they'll sell a brick, and that brick has got whatever processing and memory in it, and that's something you dispose of every couple of years. And then you've got the more expensive investments in the external GPUs and external storage and stuff, and then you just got a lot of daisy chain crap sitting on your desk. And maybe that's what the Mac Pro is. Maybe the Mac Pro is going to be this brick, right? But the other thing that I think that we need to recognize is that the industry is now shifting towards integrated packages, right? So you think of the SoC, which originally started with the concept of the SoC,
system on a
chip, in cell phones and tablets and things like that on the ARM side. To some extent, AMD also started to do that, but they kind of that concept but then kind of fell by the wayside. But I think what we're starting to see is a lot more of that computer is going to be on a single chip package, and that chip package is going to include RAM, it's going to include cache, it's going to include CPUs, all that stuff pretty much, and then whatever's left is going to be like support chips and stuff. Your whole PC, your computer will be on a main board like this big, right? Now, as we move to more powerful non-Intel processors. Now, I think the 800-pound gorilla that we're looking at across this other side of the room is just the fact that the Intel platform is over 40 years old. Okay, the Intel platform is almost as old as us. Now that platform, okay, has a lot of legacy stuff that we keep kicking that can of legacy baggage forward. Windows had a lot of legacy baggage to unload, but so does Apple with OS X. Now, we know that if you try to run applications that have been designed for x86 platforms and then run them on ARM, you end up with this whole thunking sort of, emulation crap that's going on, right? Especially, we're starting to see this with the first crop of laptops, by HP that use the, I believe it's the Qualcomm 835 or 845 chip, which is a higher end cell phone chip. There will be we've already heard announcements of a Qualcomm 1000. We really don't know what Apple has coming down the line. We know there's the ARM A76 architecture. We're starting to get into capabilities in these non-Intel chips. They're going to rival desktop chips within the next 18 months to 2 years. Okay, so the question is, can we produce systems, okay, that are more disposable? Because we already know we have systems now that we can't fix, right? If a MacBook breaks, you're s out of luck, right? Because you can't touch the RAM, you can't fix anything. You got to bring an Apple Store, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, you got a main board. It's $500 to repair it," right? And then you're like, maybe I should just get another machine. And that's the same thing with Windows. This is the problem with all laptop personal computers, is they're effectively disposable when they break. Okay, they're not fixable. So if we're going to get into unfixable systems, then they should be cheaper so that we can replace them more often. So that's what we're going to be seeing in the future, is these replaceable systems. Now, to do that, they're going to have to get off of these legacy development platforms and start migrating code bases to more modern development models, right? And also shifting more of the workloads to the cloud, right? Which we're already seeing happening. Now, the question is this something they can do with the professional market? We know we can do it with the consumer market. We know we can do it with the enterprise market. So there's a lot more flexibility with offloading, processing, and other things. The question is this edge case crowd of the Davids and the Olivers and the Jasons and whoever it is, and my brother who has to use these really high-end paint programs and things, is this something they can move to on an ARM chip? Now, maybe not in the next 2 years, but I think it's a very possible. We may be seeing that as a very strong possibility in 3 to 5.
Oliver, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah. So on the subject of the migration to a new platform, so Apple has been doing work like for a couple of years now, and one of the things that is very interesting in that regard is that Apple can now recompile apps that are uploaded to the App Store to another platform on the server side without the developer ever having to do anything. So, and actually, something like that happened to us a couple of months ago, where suddenly a new version of our app appeared on the App Store, which we didn't upload there.
Wow, really? I thought you had to like authorize everything in that store. But,
No. So Apple can, there's this. They changed the way apps are developed and delivered so that they can, just create on their store an ARM version, for example, for the Mac version. And also, if you talk about, most of the Mac OS is already running on ARM because it's iOS. I mean, it's basically very transparent, and Apple did do the transition of the Mac operating system once from PowerPC to the Intel platform, and so they basically the whole operating system is already processor independent, so they can move it to whatever platform they want to move it, and they can also move all the apps that have been developed for the Mac for the Mac and is on their App Store. So and for example, I think one of the signals we're seeing is the push to 64-bit only apps that's going to happen in the next year and 2 years basically. So by the end of next year, Apple will simply not run, accept any it's even, they will not accept any mixed platforms apps. So it's 64-bit only apps. So right now we do have 64-bit apps, but we also deliver 32-bit binaries at the same time. So and they have to go. So and then combine this with the ability to be able to recompile on the server side, on the store side for a new platform, and you have an excellent position of making a migration to a new platform. And add to that Apple owns most of the intellectual property of the ARM chips. You might have something there where a situation where Apple might want to move the Mac to the ARM platform, and I've been expecting that to happen for the last 4 or 5 years already. And I think the main reason why they don't do that is actually a lot of people running, things like Parallels and Windows apps on the Mac as well. And this wouldn't be possible. I think that would be the big problem where this would go away, and probably a lot of maybe Apple has the numbers. I don't have the numbers. How many people are using that? But it seems that Parallels is a very, very, very successful product, and Apple pushes it left and right, and so they might have some numbers on how many people are using actually mixed environments on the Mac, and they may hesitate to pull the plug on that, and maybe we'll see machines
it
where we have
depends.
2 processors, and we have the ARM processor and the Intel processor, and we have just
the emulation technology though has gotten remarkably good over the years. As I'm sure you remember, Oliver, with Rosetta, what was needed to do the PC to the x86 transition. I was quite familiar with that company that implemented that emulator because IBM bought it. And so when I was working at IBM, IBM created an emulator using the same technology stack to compete against Sun Microsystems, so they could sell AIX machines for their database and run native Sun applications on the IBM AIX platform. And we sold a lot of mini computers with that. Now, arguably, these are $100,000 computers, not $5,000 computers, right? But that was 10 years ago, right? So I know I've seen the emulation technology that Microsoft uses for their ARM version of Windows and how they run x86 stuff, and it's so good it's actually gotten Intel kind of nervous, almost talking about lawsuit territory. So we know that ARM is in terms of its ability to they're going to need to do some work for multimodal capabilities in the operating system. They're going to need to do some work for parallelism. They're going to need to do a lot of Endian things. A lot of stuff they're going to need to do to make it work effectively. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it's doable. It's not an impossible thing to do. There's a lot of bathwater you got to throw out, right? In order to have
I would bet you that they have a fully running.
Oh, I'm sure it's working already. I'm sure it's working already. There's no question.
In their labs. So
they got a secret building on campus with 500 people working on it, and it's like they're ready to build it at the next.
They would be stupid. But
look what else we got. But wait, there's more. So I agree with you. They've been developing it for a while. I think it's a question of when they deem it to be ready. When they deem it to be ready, it will be out, and it'll be out. But I guess the question is, do people want to have, Mac tablets, and like Mac versions of Surfaces? Do they want to have, with ARM processors, or do they want to, or do they like having their iPads? I happen to love the iPad. I happen to like its interface. I happen to like the, I've gotten used to its workflow. Would I prefer a Mac instead? I don't know. I kind of like the simplicity of iOS. I like the responsiveness. But maybe there are some professional users that would like a touch Mac, that was similar to a Surface or something.
Definitely.
So I mean, there are people like my brother, I'm sure, would love to have something like that. But I think the question is, how big of a market is that compared to the iOS market again? So we're getting back to that gorilla question, which is, how much do you want to invest in that kind of a thing when the other market you deal with is 10 times the size?
So let's switch this up a bit from Apple's strategy to the strategy of our viewers. Is it time for them to move to Windows or Linux? Does it make sense to hold until Apple comes out with another machine? Is it time to build a Hackintosh, or just decide to accept the iMac Pro regardless of the screen? What's the strategy for the typical ZDNet viewer and reader, and also likewise, Oliver, for your customers? What's the strategy to be able to get that actual work done? Because if we assume that for all intents and purposes, the consumer buyer, the person who previously was just a consumer of content, might move to iOS, but the creators of content and those who have an actual workflow are not able to get all of that work done on say the iPad. They either have Windows or Linux or Mac, and with the moribund set of offerings, what's the strategy? I don't know. Adrian, do you want to take that one first? You just shook your head. You want to dive in on that?
I really think this is a complex topic.
That's why you guys are here.
Yeah, I talked to the answers, Adrian. Come on, you're supposed to think on this one, man.
I know. I've talked to a lot of people.
Phone this one in,
No. I've talked to a lot of people who are in this bind. They've got old hardware and they don't know what to do. And I think I'm seeing a lot of responses here. Some people are just saying, well, my old Mac still works. It may not be as good as I want it to be. this whole talk of eGPUs and stuff like that, I think is another example of Apple saying, hey, your stuff will last longer.
Right.
You don't need to kind of be buying more Macs. I'm seeing people shift to Windows. And as you said, kind of, especially people who use Adobe and stuff like that, the transition between Mac and Windows now is very small. And there's very little speed bump in moving there.
Yeah,
Even
but there's
I can
an
switch kind of pretty happily between Adobe Creative Cloud on one platform and the other. It doesn't seem to be that big a deal.
There's an interesting change, though. I switched from Adobe Premiere to Final Cut because I thought Adobe Premiere would give me the option to be across platforms. My workflow on Final Cut is days less per project than Adobe Premiere, and you know, that's not
Is that Final Cut 10?
Yeah. Because Adobe kept crashing constantly, and there's a very strong plugin market for Final Cut that accomplishes a lot of things. You know, you can buy a $50 plugin that can save you 2 weeks of work, and so it's a very robust market. Now, again, a lot of this would also be accomplished by some of the are they panels, Oliver, in Mimo? The various overlays and kinds of things that you can do in Mimo Live, so you don't even need post-processing.
They're called layers.
Yeah.
So,
So you don't even need the kind of post-processing I'm talking about. So instead of, like, for example, this discussion is going to take a couple days to post-process and get up there, where we could potentially do this live with just a scene switching in Mimo, and I wouldn't have those days of work. So you look at those kinds of things. But is it time to switch platforms? Is it time to just hold and keep using the like in my case, the 2013 very well equipped iMac? Is it time to look for Linux or build your own Hackintosh?
I'm saying if it ain't broke, don't fix it, man. I don't like to spend money.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you have to look at you know, your specific case very, very carefully. It's like, can you do you need anything that you don't have yet, and does it you know, which platform gives you that? And you know, I'm not buying into you know, Windows being as, you know, same as Mac. You see a lot of you know, if you are in the Apple ecosystem with the Mac and the iPhone and the Apple Watch and stuff like that, Apple does a lot of work where it makes it seamless to integrate all these things. For example, if I copy something on my iPhone, it's also in the clipboard on my Mac, and so I can move data around between my phone and my iPad and my Mac very, very easily. And I think, coming back to a discussion we had a little bit earlier, I think is what you're gonna see is you know, you now have these hybrid apps between, you know, where you have desktop apps that talk to cloud servers, and the same thing I think you will have on the desktop computer market. You will have apps that you know, where you have your user interfaces on your iPad, and the processing power is in a box that is somewhere in the shelf, you know, and but you can walk around and, you know, do all the controlling on your iPad. Something like if you look at Logic, you know, where Apple provides you know, a very, very neat remote control. This basically an extension of the UI of the app on your iPad. Something like that. And if you look at, you know, if you're on the road and you're looking at, you know, my computer died, you know, and I have to get a new one, you know, probably a good strategy is still, you know, bite the bitter apple and get a new Mac from the current lineup, because that's, you know, probably less expensive than trying to move between platforms. Moving between platforms is possible, no problem, but it's always an investment. It's always something where you have to, you know, you have to consider your own time. And you know, there's people who have enough time and they can build themselves a Hackintosh, or they can build a Linux box, and then, you know, they tinker around weeks and weeks and weeks before they do anything. You know, but if you are looking for, you know, I want to get, you know, my stuff done, then probably stick with the platform you're already using, unless, you know, the other platform gives you, like, twice the render speed or something like that, and at half the price or something. If
And
you're
it depends on
doing,
the size of your shop and your
yes,
budget. I mean, you have your
yeah,
one-man
sure,
development shop, right? But then you got your digital domain type places like in Lucasfilms and Disney's,
yeah,
where
sure,
they will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on kit, and they'll
yeah.
throw it out next year just because they got another
Yeah,
movie.
so what I'm
It's
saying is
all
it's a
it's a
very
question.
individual question. It's different for everyone, I think.
Absolutely.
So we're not necessarily ending this, or we're coming up on time. So we're not necessarily ending this with it's foolish to stay on the Mac platform, or that it's foolish to leave the Mac platform. What we're really doing is coming back to, it's up to for pros. Not, I mean, for consumers, it's a completely different story. But when I say pros, I mean people who are using these things as part of work, as part of workflow, as you have to get up in the morning and you have to get something done by some period of time kind of user. For that group of users, it really is very dependent on each individual's use and what they're doing, whether it makes sense to stick it out with a platform that we're not really sure has a future. Or are we sure it does not have a future, or are we sure that it does, or do we just not know?
Everything dies.
Yeah.
I'm going to die.
Yeah.
You're going to die.
Yeah.
Adrian's going to die, and Oliver's going to die. The question is, when is this going to die? Now, does Mac have 10 years in it? Okay, maybe. I don't think it's got 20. I don't think anything that we're looking at in the industry right now has 20.
No.
The Intel,
Yeah,
the
but
Intel
that's also
platform,
true
the
for
Intel
Windows.
platform, the Intel platform is making it to 60 years old. I can tell you that. I mean, the writing is on the wall for that thing, right? I think we can see that. What we think of our understanding of desktops and process and CPUs, right? We've accepted that Intel was king for 30, 40 years. I think we can very strongly make an argument that there will be something to replace it soon, right? And whether it's ARM or RISC or whatever it is that comes, it won't be an Intel platform. So everything that we call Macintosh and Windows and these names and whatever we call these platforms, okay, they're not going to be exactly the same platforms in 5 years. That is much as a given. So the question is the sky falling on Apple and Mac? No, it's for the same reason it's not falling on Apple and on Microsoft and Windows. I think we can say that there's now a divergence between consumer and pro. It used to be they were the same platforms. I think we can say that consumer's going its own way and pro it's going its other way. And maybe there's some cloud glue and IoT and other stuff that sort of ties it together, but they're very different worlds now, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I first got this machine, which is the main machine I use at my desk, which is now 5 years old, I got it with with the plan of using Parallels heavily and Windows heavily in a Parallels environment. And in fact, I found that my very, very expensive Sager was actually slower than Parallels running on the iMac. And so what I was doing is I was doing, I would say 70% of my work inside of Parallels, and maybe just a little bit of my work on the Mac, but I could drag and drop between the two environments. Now, over that 5-year time, it has been good 6 months since I've had to launch Parallels at all, because Office has gotten better, and because there are so many better cloud environments. So I live in Chrome a lot more than I did 5 years ago. And then most of the creative apps that I run are now mostly Mac-based instead of needing to switch between platforms. So as part of that, while on one hand there's the Mac side that has the software has improved substantially, the other question is, of course, the cloud has improved substantially. So are we also looking at a future where a lot of the things, when we start talking about these desktop environments, instead of a multi-monitor environment, for example, all connected to one eGPU or something, we're instead going to be talking about a bunch of tablets, each their own intrinsic mobile device connected to some back-end cloud that is in effect our main backbone?
Welcome back to the mainframe. The Microsoft and Google and Amazon mainframe, my friends.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
I think yeah.
Go ahead.
You can also look at at the applications and see that there's always there's always new things coming up and shifts going on. And if you look at, new startups coming up and how they structure their services and their products and their applications, you see that they want to avoid, lock into one platform. So they move away from the concept of the platform. I mean, maybe we are not talking about hardware or, system platforms anymore. I remember that Facebook is seeing itself as a platform. So it's kind of maybe, it's going to be, different things happening in different areas at the same time. And so we're going to see change. And I think the question if the Mac has a place in that is depending on what Apple does with it and how they, evolve the product and how they evolve the operating system, and if they have a vision where it should go, or if they just simply see it as a, right now, just to put it into perspective, Apple sold 20 million Macs last year, and they added between the Worldwide Developers Conference 2017 and the 2018 Worldwide Developers Conference. According to Tim Cook, they added about 4 million new developers who each need a Mac. So roughly a fifth of the Macs sold were just sold to new iPhone developers, and the 20 million existing developers need a new machine, and the average of every 2 years. So
20 million developers need Mac OS to develop. Now that Mac OS does not have to live in your house or in your premises. It could live in the cloud. You got companies like Mac Stadium and Mac and Cloud, which are doing Mac hosting. And unless you're doing high-end, unless you're doing stuff that requires heavy GPU type of, you need to be able to see the screen updates, gaming kind of stuff. But there is a great deal of things you can do with cloud-based, GPU offloading and things like that. So I don't know if Apple's willing to cannibalize their Mac business by putting stuff up in the cloud. I think there's a lot that Apple could do with Microsoft and Azure to enable that sort of thing. Whether they'll do it, I don't know. But it's technically feasible now. Citrix has proven you can do these type of high-end, GPU-intensive apps with cloud-based rendering. They've gotten the parallelism, they've gotten the multi-tenancy problem solved for the most part. So it's not tremendously as expensive to do now as it was maybe 3-4 years ago when they first demoed it.
So Oliver, I don't want to ask you the detailed questions of your business, but I am curious. You've got iOS products, which are that market is clearly booming, but is the Mac market still worth investing in for the amount of development you're doing? Are you seeing growth? Are you seeing a level playing field? You're betting your company on this stuff. So what are you seeing, and where do you think you're going?
In our case and a lot of other, cases of independent developers in our size range, I see actually that people go back to Mac development, and because there's more money to be made in the Mac development than in the iOS development, and selling the business of selling Mac apps, seems to see a renaissance in the developer community, because it's easier to ask higher prices, and there's options outside the App Store, and all kinds of things that make it easier to have a viable business on the Macs. Is easier than to have it on iOS.
Well, that is very telling. So let's wrap this up. Let's go person to person. Where can you be found? And final thoughts. I started with Jason coming in, so we'll start with him coming out. Jason, some final thoughts. Where can you be found? What are you up to you should?
Sure, I can be found on my blog on techbroiler.com or zdnet.com/blog/Perlow if you want to go there. Also at jperlow on Twitter. Final thoughts. I think the Mac still has, at least 5 5 to 10 years worth of life in it as a platform, right? Just like all the other things that we use today probably have 5 to 10 years of life for it as a platform. The question is what's going to happen in the consumer space versus the content creator and professional space, right? I think that, as Oliver said, there's definitely money to still be made in developing high-end Mac applications, right? There's still audio to process. There's still 3D models to be made. There's still frescoes to be painted for movies and all kinds of things. Still comes big advertising gigs to be done. All these things, all this kind of work still has to be done, and the Mac is still a very strong platform there. But I think there will be changes on the consumer side, on the lower end of the spectrum, for the Mac market. I think there may be some consolidation in models and in their overall system design of Macintoshes going forward, right? Which makes sense to have consolidation and maybe more modularization. So maybe you'll be able to mix and match things a little bit better. I think it's going to be exciting times as we're starting to see the transition towards the ARM chips. As we start, I'm very curious to see what kind of benchmarks we're going to see in terms of how much memory these ARM chips can have, how many processors they can have, the complexity of the applications they can run. And that's really going to be where the rubber hits the road in the next couple of years.
Adrian, you're next.
Well, I can be found on Hardware 2.0 over at ZDNet or at the PC Doc if anybody wants to find me on Twitter. As for final thoughts, I think I agree with mostly what Perlow said there. I think we're looking for 10 years easy. But I think it's important to look at where Apple is moving to. And if we look at where its growth is, it's in accessories and services. And I think Apple is priming us to say we're spending less R&D on the Mac in cycles. And I think it's slowing down the cycles. Now, whether that's just because it realizes that it can still sell old Macs, or whether it's actually kind of priming the pump for some change, it's hard to tell at this stage. There's definitely this confusing message between the iPad is this new laptop and it isn't when we're talking about edge case professionals, but only Apple knows how big that market is. And I think what Oliver said there about kind of the number of developers it's added and the number of Macs that Apple sells every year, I think it's starting to become clear that an awful lot of those Macs are going to developers now. And I think that that's going to be where the change happens. Now, Apple's not going to want to just dump a $25 billion business overnight, but I think it is going to want to change that. And I think we're going to see some shifts maybe over the next 5 years. I think next year we're going to see a whole bunch of new Macs land and everybody's going to be happy, and there's going to be this idea that Mac is saved, Mac has been saved, and everybody's going to forget about it for a year or two. Well, I think maybe at the 5-year mark, I think we're looking at some serious change happening. And I think it's going to be something that pushes Apple services, because Apple, as Oliver just said, there's opportunities to sell software outside of the App Store. And I don't think Apple really like that. And if it wants to maximize revenue, that's one place it could lock up. And ARM could certainly let it do that. And I think 5 years from now, I think we're going to start to see the beginnings of these changes. And I think by 10 years, I think I agree with Perlow. I think we're going to see some serious changes.
And Oliver, where can you be found? Your final thoughts? And Mimo Live, that's not an App Store app, is it?
No, we sell it exclusively on our website, which you can find at boinx.com, boinx.com. And one of the reasons is that it's a very expensive app, and I think giving Apple 30% of the revenue would just cut off my marketing budget. So it would be much harder to sell, and the App Store is really not selling actively. So I don't think the App Store at this point is a good match for a high-end creative video product. Also, we've moved to a subscription model, and that's significantly harder to implement on the Mac in the App Store. For the foreseeable future, we have no plans to move Mimo Live to the App Store, or even make it available on the App Store. I certainly, I think we might be interpreting too much into science. Everything can change when Apple wants it to change. That's kind of a thing that has happened to us over the last 25 years a couple of times. That Apple did shift things, and then always there were new opportunities, and the world didn't end, and sometimes the change was to the better, and sometimes the change was to the worse. So we just have to wait and see, and maybe, as I said, in November, maybe we don't have this discussion anymore when Apple, if Apple owns up to the lip service, and I think it's kind of telling that they are now open up basically every keynote with the words "We still love the Mac." Even if they haven't followed up yet, if they would really truly want to let it die, they would just probably stop talking about it. The fact that they put oil on the fire and keep the discussion on the Mac platform going, gives me a little bit of hope here. They have to follow up. If they don't within the next 6 months, then we have to reevaluate our situation here. But right now, we have excellent hardware that our customers can buy to run our products, and there's no shortfall of performance or options, except for the obvious thing that some of our customers would like to mount their computers in 19-inch racks, and there's basically no real option there right now. But maybe in 6 months things have changed again. Maybe not, and then by next Worldwide Developers Conference, we might have to make some tough decisions, but maybe not. So, and that it has been this way for the last 15, 20 years. So I'm quite relaxed about that, actually.
Awesome. Well, for ZDNet's Roundtable, and my name is David Gewirtz, I want to thank my guests Jason Perlow, Adrian Kingsley-Hughes, and our special guest Oliver Breidenbach for coming out today and having
Oliver, thank you, man. Great discussion today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Oliver.
It's been an exceptional pleasure.
Awesome. So we've had a great time, and feel free to leave us comments and tell us what you think about the future of these platforms. And my apology for Pixel in the background deciding to say hello right now. I'm going to leave you guys with about 20 seconds of Oregon landscapes, and have yourself a great day, at night, morning, wherever you happen to be in the world, everyone. Coming to you from Oregon in the United States, Florida in the United States, Wales in the United Kingdom, and Salzburg in Austria. Thanks, everybody.